In this video, we're going to go over some different information in regards to proper tool usage as well as screws and what you need to be aware of with screws and even some screw damage that you need to make sure that you are being careful to avoid. So for starters, something that you need to be aware of is screw size. So all the screws inside of these devices can be different size, not just even between phone types. Let's say an iPhone 7 and an iPhone 8. They don't have all the same screws inside of them. Even throughout one specific phone, like an iPhone 7, you're going to have different types of screws, whether it's length, bit type, positioning, all these different things are going to be slightly different from phone to phone and even internally on the phone. When you get into some even newer devices, sometimes even on one shield plate, you're going to have multiple types of screws on that shield plate. So working with mobile devices, the threading of the screw can actually be as much as just 0.1 millimeter off. And if you're not careful with this, you could damage things on the board or other components and these types of things. So it's very important that you pay attention to the different screw sizes. So this right here is some examples in the phone. So if you look right here in these two images, every single screw that you see here is a different size. So this one right here with the different colors, you have a 1.7 millimeter, you have one that's 1.3 millimeter, you have one that's 1.2 millimeter. That's a difference of 0.1 millimeters, okay? And that is in regards to the length of the screw. And if you were to put the 1.3 millimeter screw in the 1.2 millimeter hole, you could then be screwing into the motherboard, and that is something we want to make sure that we avoid. So how can we avoid this type of issue? Well, because you have different sized screws, layouts are extremely important. When we talk about layouts, we're generally referring to a magnetic project mat that we use to ensure all screw locations are labeled, and it also will hold the screws in place so that it keeps us organized throughout the repair. Now, there's many different ways you can go about this. We're going to take a look at a couple of different example layouts in just a moment. But the key thing here is that layouts are so important. You must have very good organization when you are disassembling these devices so that you don't run into any issues as you are reassembling them. And one thing that gets mixed up a lot is screws. So here are a couple example layouts. On the left side here, you're going to see that there is some pre-printed screw mat. So basically you can see the entire phone in there, and you can see all those little dots on that pre-printed mat. All those little dots correlate to a specific screw internally in that device. These can be really handy, but not always extremely accurate. We prefer to use a method of drawing out our shield plates and drawing out what we see to create these layouts. The reason we prefer this is because, number one, you are accurate with what you are seeing. So like I said, sometimes the pre-printed mats are not necessarily accurate. But number two, this provides you a way of handling new devices before you get a pre-printed screw mat for it. So let's say, for an example, the iPhone 15 gets released and you have one in your shop, but they have not released the pre-printed screw mat for this. How are you going to go about disassembling this device without mixing up screws? Well, you're going to need to draw out some type of layout to keep yourself organized. So magnetic dry erase project mats are always a really good thing to have around, whether big or small, so that you can keep track of all of your screws and you can keep everything organized. If you don't follow a layout, you could potentially run into the issue of needing a micro solderer, and we want to try to avoid that if we can. So let's talk about bit sizes a little bit. You don't want to purchase cheap, large toolkits. When you start getting your tools in, you don't want to just go buy the biggest set, the cheapest set, whatever it is. You actually want to make sure that you are looking for high quality drivers. And a lot of times those high quality drivers come in single driver sets. So it's just one driver. For example, Weehaw is an excellent brand. It has great quality, great warranty, okay? Lifetime warranty on these. So these drivers actually come and you can buy them individually for your needs. And as I said, that they have a warranty that goes with them for life. So let's talk about some standard bit sizes. So before we get into the standard bit sizes, we want to make sure you understand what you're looking at when you read the side of some different drivers you may come across. So on the side of these drivers you see here, there's actually different things written on it, numbers, symbols, all these different things. So I wanted to break that down for you so that you knew what you were looking at when you were picking up your drivers. So for example, you can see here you have the cross sign or the plus sign 0.6 x25 mmJF-608. So what does that mean? What are you looking at? So the first part is the image of the bit design. So if you see that plus sign or that cross, that is going to tell you that it is a Phillips, okay? Then the next thing is going to be some type of name, if it has it. That would be the name that they call that bit. Most don't have that, okay? So in this one, it doesn't have it. It just has the symbol of what the bit is. The next thing is the size. So in this particular example, it's 0.6. That's the size of the blade, the width of the blade on this driver. So the next number that you see here is you have the 0.6 by 25 millimeter. So it's similar to when you're selecting wood and you have a 2 by 4. So you have here your 0.6 is the width of the blade and the 25 millimeter is the length of the pole, but not the whole length. It's just the length of the pole, okay? And that is 25 millimeters in this example. Number 5, you may have a tool that says ESD. That just means that it does not create its own static. And a lot of times ESD safe equipment is made of a dissipative material so that it does not interfere with anything on the board. So let's take a look at some specific drivers that you need to be familiar with in these device repairs. Number 1, we have the Pentalobe Screwdriver. So it's a 5-point star. It's a 0.8 millimeter inside. It's mostly found in iPhones, but can be found in a few other devices. For example, it has been seen in a blue device, BLU. It's another type of phone. So these Pentalobe screws are typically found on the bottom part of the iPhone, one on either side of your charge port as seen in this image right here. Next up, we're going to have a Phillips screwdriver. So the Phillips screwdriver is typically seen as like a cross like so, as you see in this image. Now we are going to see a couple of different sizes throughout different devices that we repair. So you can have the Phillips 000, 00, or just Phillips 0. You also can see the Phillips 1 or 2 in some devices. Next up, we have a Triwing screwdriver. So this is actually found in iPhone 7 and up. It's also found in Samsung S21s, and some other devices have these drivers as well, or have these screw bits as well. So the sizes typically seen, but not always, are going to be the Y000 and the Y00. Next up, we have a standoff screwdriver. So if you take a look at this image, it kind of looks like it is a Phillips head where it has that cross. However, in the center, it has a point. So this screw, a standoff screw, is actually a layering screw. Some people actually use a flathead to remove these screws. However, we believe it's best practice to always use the appropriate tool for the job. So we recommend having a standoff driver in order to remove these screws and keep it as nice and neat as possible and not run the risk of stripping the screw out. Next up, this one is a little bit more rare. This is actually found in iPhone 6s, and sometimes you'll see it in some MacBooks. But this is a Standoff HEX Screwdriver. So this is some image of where it is located and what that driver actually looks like. However, like I said, it is a rare find in these different devices as of right now. Next up, we're going to talk about proper tool use. Using tools appropriately is one great way you can ensure that you're not stripping a screw. Small mobile devices have very, very tiny screws in them, And so you need to make sure you know what tool to use and what size, and make sure you're holding it appropriately so you don't run the risk of causing screw damage. So first up, we're going to talk about how to hold a screwdriver. So many people are used to holding a screwdriver in some type of way, and they think of these really large screwdrivers. However, that's not what we're using inside these devices. These devices need precision drivers, okay? So they're a lot smaller. And as tempted as you may be to use both hands, it's important to remember to only use one hand when you are using these drivers, and you must keep your driver straight up and down during disassembly and reassembly. This will help prevent you from stripping out screws. So there's a couple ways you can hold your driver. This first way is to palm the head of the driver, the top of the driver, and place all of your fingers down around it and use your hand to kind of twist and roll in between your fingers. The second way you can hold a driver is placing your index finger on top, your thumb and other fingers on the sides to grip it. Sometimes I'll even point my pinky down towards the tip of the driver so that I can ensure I guide it into the screw hole properly, but then I pull my pinky right up to where I can hold onto it and twist my driver with one hand. As stated before, you want to avoid two hands at all times. This image right here demonstrates what a two-hand hold could look like, but I've seen many different things over the years. So this right here is just an example of how we do not want you to hold a driver. You want to hold it in one of these two ways. So as stated previously, one way to avoid the strip screws is to make sure that you are holding your driver straight up and down. We like to tell people to think of a can of Ready Whip, and you need to make sure you point it straight up and down so that you get the proper usage out of it. Same thing in holding these drivers and working with these screws. They're very small. You want to ensure that you do not strip them and cause yourself even more headache. So holding your driver straight up and down is going to really help you in this area. Now let's talk about torque. Since the screws that we work with in these devices tend to be quite small, torque actually plays a huge role in reinstalling the screws we remove. So what I mean when I say torque is it's referring to the amount of twisting force. In this case, it refers to the screws. You're not trying to tighten these screws down like lug nuts on a tire. Rather, you should tighten them until you feel the slight bit of resistance and then you stop. Okay. Another option, you could research the appropriate torque for each and every individual screw and use an adjustable torque driver to install all of the screws. This can be tricky and time-consuming, but this is not necessary if you are gentle enough to feel the resistance. So you want to ensure that you are being very cautious, being self-aware of the situation, and you need to make sure that you stop yourself before you over-tighten. If you over-tighten, you could strip the screw or cause screw post damage or board damage, and we'll get into some of those different damages shortly. Something else to touch on when you're reinstalling screws is you should pay attention to whether or not they have Loctite. Most of the time it's a blue coloration on the threading of the screw as seen in this image below. So if you see that this has the Loctite on it, you need to look into your certifications and your partnerships to see how you need to handle it. Some partnerships and certifications will require new screws, some may require new Loctite installation, and some will require nothing at all and you can just reinstall the old screws as is. So just depending on your certifications, you need to make sure that you are fully aware of what is taking place. So let's talk about strip screws. Everybody has a strip screw story. It happens way more often than we would like. So how do we handle this? Well, there's lots of options for removing strip screws. You've seen people that actually will use a latex glove, layer that down and use a driver to remove it. Some use rubber bands, some use a screw extractor, which has these claws that like pretty much grab at the drive or the screw to screw it out. Flathead drivers sometimes are used to kind of put pressure underneath and then untwist it. Soldering, so you can actually take one driver, solder it to the actual screw and remove it in that way. You will need to make sure you have a replacement screw for that if that is the case. Grip tight is also another alternative. You can drop a couple of drops into the screw and place the driver on top. That may help. A larger driver sometimes can be beneficial to remove a strip screw, and a smart pen is also another option that many are using at this time. It is essentially a Dremel with a very fine point where you can Dremel out the center of it and remove the screw. So once we are done talking about strip screws, let's talk about screw damage. Despite the small size in mobile devices, the damage these screws can cause can be major. So over the next few slides, we're going to talk about how the screws can be damaged if you don't handle them properly, okay? So this right here, what you can actually see on this slide is a normal post versus a damaged post. So a lot of times you screw things through this post on these devices. Sometimes they're in the frame, sometimes they're on the board. Either way, if they're damaged, it's a soldering issue or a full housing swap issue. So these right here are the posts that they would go into, and you can see how widened the one that is damaged is. This can be caused by a screw that was too large for the hole or over tightening as well. Right here you can see a wrong screw hole. Things that can happen if you have placed a screw in the wrong screw hole can be board damage, component damage, strip screws, and damaged posts, which once again, this one right here is a long screw damage. So basically it went into the board. On this next page, you're going to see multiple examples of board damage, and you can see where the threading has now been stripped and pulled on these boards. So now it needs a micro solderer to take a look at it, and a micro solderer that's skilled enough to be able to replace these different pathways in the board. In the center there, that missing circle is actually a screw post like we saw in that first image. So you want to make sure that you are always placing the appropriate screw in the appropriate hole and you are not over tightening them either. Screens. So how can screws affect screens? Well, actually they can affect them in several different ways, from different scratches, cracks in the glass, pressure points, and even closure issues. So when I say closure issues, I'm talking about when you go to close your device and you try to press on it and it's not closing all the way. Sometimes there's actually a screw that is stuck somewhere in there that is preventing this from happening. So as you go to close your device, that screw is preventing it, and you could potentially crack your glass by putting too much pressure on it. Leading into the pressure, you could have the pressure points or the pressure cracks. So if you look right here, you're going to see these are pressure cracks from over tightening or under tightening, typically found in the ear speaker area or the home button area. Now, a lot of people in the industry will refer to some damage like this as a nightstand issue. So this would be somebody comes in and they say to you, I just had my phone repaired last week. I haven't dropped it. Nothing has happened, but it has this crack in the screen. A lot of people will say that that damage had to have happened and occurred because somebody dropped the device. However, that is not always the case. If you have under-tightened or over-tightened the screws in the areas of the home button or your ear speaker, that crack could be caused by you not screwing properly. So things that could happen if you under tighten is, say the screw is sticking out too far, it's loose and it came out too far, you've closed it up, it's put too much pressure, it cracks the screen. Or if you have over tightened it, it can then cause you to have those pressure points in the screen and sometimes even chip the paint. And over time, it weakens and weakens the glass until it cracks, okay? So you always need to be very careful and pay attention to the resistance that you feel. You can also have just pressure points in the glass, which can show up as just little white dots throughout it. So you need to pay attention for that as well. Another thing that can happen is the lines in the screen. So if you start to see lines in screens, that can be signs of the pressure points too. Next up, let's talk about batteries. So batteries and screws do not get along, and that is 100% for sure. These things are what can happen with your battery. So first of all, you could have your battery swallow a screw. If there is a screw in your device that is left loose, hanging around, floating around in there, over time, your battery actually is going to envelop that screw, and that could then cause other issues such as puncture, swelling, thermal runaway, which means battery fire. Okay, so all these different things can happen all because you left a screw laying around in the device. Now, sometimes this can even happen if you just place a screw in the wrong hole, or you place the screw in and you don't tighten it all the way down. If the screw is loose somewhere, this can happen because it could fall out of the device. Something I also like to tell people is that we want to make sure that you don't leave screws in a device from your vibrate motor. We always tell people to tighten down the screws in your vibrate motor because especially in iPhones, they can be strong enough to loosen up the screws. So if ever you open up a device and you find loose screws there, always take a look at your vibrate motor and make sure that there are screws in place for that so that your battery does not end up having issues with a loose screw in the device. Another issue you could experience is colored screens. Always be sure that your screws are in the right hole. If you go to power on your device and it comes up with a solid color, it could be blue, red, yellow, green. If it comes up and it's a solid color as seen in this picture, this is going to tell you that you screwed your screws in your wrong holes and you messed up and you caused board damage. So you want to make sure that you avoid this at all costs and you don't damage somebody's phone further than the way it came into you. So in conclusion, I hope that this gives you a better understanding as to screws and proper tool usage and how to avoid damaging things with your screws.